Hello there, my name is Valerie, and today I'm going to be talking about books in translation, that is, books that have been translated from one language to another, whether that be from another language into English, or English into another language, or other languages into each other. I took several translation classes in grad school, along with a linguistics class in which I wrote a paper on the translation of Harry Potter, so it's definitely a topic that has always interested me. But it was when I kept hearing about the book The ThreeBody Problem a few months ago that I decided it would be fun to do a video on this topic. The ThreeBody Problem is a best-selling science fiction book in China and has just recently been translated into English. Now, I had never read anything before that was originally written in Chinese, aside from the Tao Te Ching, which I had to read in college, and so I was just really interested as to how it would read, having originally been written in Chinese. So I picked it up at the library, and though the science did at times overwhelm me, the book did not disappoint on the fascinating translation front. So let's talk about why literary translation in particular can be so challenging. So one of the biggest challenges for any translator, but maybe more particularly for literary translators, is deciding somehow where to end up on the scale that is literal versus figurative. It's not an either-or issue, it's definitely a scale, and it's something that really all translators have to wrestle with to some degree. The issue with literary translation and this scale is if you're translating, for example, something from Russian into English, you don't want the text in English to sound so anglicized that the reader doesn't even realize that it wasn't originally written in English. It just sounds like, an American or a British person wrote it, but you also don't want it to sound so Russian that it's completely unintelligible to an English speaker. So you have to find a balance between the two. One possible solution for this challenge is to make use of occasional footnotes. So some books will have at the bottom of a page maybe an explanation of a cultural concept that doesn't exist in the target language. There were tons of examples of this in the ThreeBody Problem. There were a lot of footnotes that without which I would never have understood the book even as much as I did. A lot of them explained Chinese history that the average American unfortunately would not be terribly familiar with. There were also footnotes on not exactly puns, but just kind of references. One I remember in particular was that one of the characters at one point signs into an online video game, and it gave his screen name, and it was something to the effect of sea or ocean, and there was a footnote that was a play on words on his name, because his name was similar to sea or ocean or something like that. So there were a lot of footnotes in that book, which did in some ways detract from the story. That's the other challenge, is you don't want to use too many footnotes, because if you use too many, then it's half footnotes, and then you're completely distracting from the narrative. But in small quantities, footnotes can be very useful. One example is in Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, in the Spanish translation. There are a couple footnotes. One in particular is on how apparently, at least when this was translated in Spain, they did not have an equivalent for a coroner. So the Spanish translator chose to put a little asterisk and then put at the bottom of the page an explanation of what a coroner is. They just put el coroner in the actual text, and then at the bottom they explained what that word meant. Sometimes when you read a translated text, you may not even realize that it was translated. It's usually not on the front cover or anything like that, although if you look on the inside cover, it will usually specify. So this is Inkspell by Cornelia Funk. This is the second in the Inkheart trilogy. I've actually only read the first one, which I don't own, which is why I'm showing you the second one, but it does say here, published in Germany, original text, copyright, and then it tells who translated the English version, which was Anthea Bell. And actually, when I read the first book in this series, before I started reading it, I had no idea that it was originally in German, and I got about halfway through the book, and I'd started to notice that the phrasing just seemed so original and different, and didn't seem to be falling into the cliches that English can sometimes fall into. And I don't know if I just happened to see that at the beginning, or if I thought, I wonder if this was translated. But either way, I realized it had been translated from German, and that was why it sounded so original. So I thought that was really interesting that even though I didn't know it was translated, I was able to notice a difference. It wasn't a bad difference. It wasn't a difference that pulled me out of the narrative. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was a difference that pulled me into the narrative and made me feel that this story was original. So as you might imagine, since I wrote a paper on the topic for my linguistics class, Harry Potter might be my favorite book to talk about in relation to translation, or really anything ever. Harry Potter and really any fantasy novels pose a particularly complex challenge for translators because fantasy novels are renowned for including a lot of invented words. So the translator is left with the decision of whether to try and come up with some new word that encapsulates somewhat of the same meaning in their language, or to just leave the word as it is, since it's just made up, there's no translation for it, they may as well leave it as is. In the Spanish version, they go with the decision to mostly leave the words as they are, so that means that the house names are all the same, the characters' names are all the same, Muggles are still called Muggles, although as a friend pointed out to me, maybe they end up getting pronounced Moogles, which is kind of funny. In fact, the translator of the first Harry Potter book was so set on leaving all of the invented words and names as they were that she didn't even translate the name of the three-headed dog Fluffy. She left it as Fluffy, which I think is an atrocity because she very easily could have found the most innocuous sounding dog name in Spanish and changed it to that, and it would have kept the joke, but she left it as Fluffy, and so any Spanish speakers who don't understand the word fluffy in English miss out on a joke. Some other jokes it's more difficult to translate. For example, Diagon Alley is very difficult to translate into another language because you can put, Diagon and the word for alley, but that doesn't sound like diagonally when you put it together, which is kind of a plot point in the second book when Harry uses Floo powder, and that's how he ends up in Nocturne Alley. But by far my favorite fun fact about the translation of Harry Potter would have to be the linguistic hoops that all the translators had to jump through to get Tom Marvolo Riddle to be an anagram of I am Lord Voldemort in their various languages. In Spanish, it was pretty simple. They just changed Marvolo to Sorvolo to make it Soy Lord Voldemort instead of I am Lord Voldemort. There's a really interesting Wikipedia article that talks a lot about the translation of Harry Potter, and that's where I've gotten some of this information, which I had read in the past. A lot of the translators just changed Tom Riddle's middle name in order to make it fit with the anagram, but my favorite is the French version where they had to make Lord Voldemort's middle name Elvis in order to make the anagram work. The article on Wikipedia is a gem. I'm going to link it below. There's some really interesting information on there about the translation of Harry Potter. Those might be some of the more difficult aspects of literary translation, the puns and anagrams and other forms of wordplay. Suffice it to say, I do not envy the poor souls who have to translate Terry Pratchett's Discworld. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I have so much to say on the topic that there's actually going to be a part 2 where I will talk more about how many translated books English speakers read. Spoiler alert, it's not many. Let me know in the comments if you have any favorite translated works and whether or not you could tell that they were a translation. Until next Tuesday, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and thank you for watching.